After watching Invincible, I saw this weird picture of an old man wearing a superhero costume. I was intrigued, to be honest. But since it was on Netflix, I was beyond skeptical. So I ended up watching the first season. And I really like it. But I do have to give a little disclaimer. Because if you watch this expecting amazing special effects and amazing costume designs, I would advise you it's not going to be what you're looking for. But if you're willing to overlook those aspects, I can certainly guarantee you this is a pretty good series. It has its fair share of problems, but none of them are plot breaking problems. Seriously. I watched it twice, so I can give it the old long man treatment. The characters are interesting and the story is intriguing. I would be lying if I told you I didn't like it. This story is separated into two timelines, the past and the present. In the past timeline, we follow Sheldon and his brother's strange quest, which leads to them getting superpowers. While the present is Sheldon trying desperately to reconnect with his children while saving the world. Even though I found the past timeline to be a lot more interesting than the present one is not bad at all. Even though Sheldon and his family are the main characters, there are a lot more interesting characters. Now, before I talk about everything in detail, I would like to slap a spoiler warning right here. The show starts with Sheldon's son and daughter playing with another child. While they are playing their little game, Chloe, who is Sheldon's daughter, accidentally uses her power, which gets the attention of her father. Sheldon comes rushing and gives some, solid advice, which I really like. They even reference the famous Uncle Ben line.
With great power comes
great responsibility.
No. Well, yeah.
But right after this heartwarming conversation ends, Sheldon is immediately distracted by someone in need of help. So he flies away, leaving his children in the middle of a park. This small 2 or 3 minute scene does an excellent job conveying how Sheldon's life is invaded by the crime-fighting magnificent utopian. And after this establishing scene, we suddenly flash forward to the present, where Brandon, who is Sheldon's son, watches the television in a restaurant, finishing his meal. But suddenly Brandon hears the sound of firearms being fired. So he rushes out the restaurant in a flash. Now, the first time I watched this, I groaned because it's such a trope, and this careless attitude could end up revealing his secret identity to the world. But to my surprise, most of the superheroes aren't hiding who they are. Instead, almost every one of them perform their duties protecting the innocent, similar to an occupation. I find this extremely similar to the superheroes from The Boys. But this show is a lot different from The Boys in many ways. But we can get to that later. So Brandon dons his costume and rushes to the scene of the crime. Apparently a robot lady is robbing an armored vehicle with gold bars. The armored lady and Brandon fight. The armored lady throws Brandon into a skyscraper, breaking a window and a wall. And suddenly, Sheldon appears out of nowhere and swats the armored lady like a bug. And that is when we get to find out that Sheldon is very hard on his son. Although he harshly orders him to do better next time, Sheldon does so in an intense voice. But we get the sense that Utopian genuinely wants his son to do better. So far, I have taken great effort to not add any spoilers. But after my first watching, I noticed a lot of neat little details in my second watching. So the villain of the series is first suspected to be Black Star, a Darkseid ripoff. But then it is slowly revealed that the mastermind behind all the misfortune was their old teammate named Skyfox. But in the final moments of the final episode, it is confirmed that the true villain was Sheldon's brother Walt, all along. The first time I realized this was the case, I was confused. It felt like this twist came out of absolutely nowhere. But the second time I watched it, it was so interesting to see Walt slowly manipulating everyone around him and slowly slipping in supervillain monologues into chit-chat he had with his brother. So after apprehending the armored lady, we follow Sheldon in his countryside farmhouse. This is where we are introduced to Sheldon's wife and also a superhero named Lady Liberty. Although she doesn't do much in the first few episodes, she becomes an integral part to the plot later on. After having a beer with his wife, Sheldon discusses how disappointed he is in Brandon. And this cynical conversation reaches the superhuman ears of Brandon, who is mopping up on the rooftop. But Brandon's sulking session is interrupted by his uncle Walt coming home and deciding to greet him. Unlike Sheldon and Brandon, who has the power of Superman, Walt has powers more similar to that of Professor Xavier. And the conversation they have there leads to a flashback to a simpler time, a time without superpowers, and a time when Samson Steele was owned by Sheldon's father. This little flashback gives us an idea of what Walt and Sheldon were like when they were young. This was right before the Great Depression. The intelligent and thoughtful Walt tries his best to stop his father and brother from trying to expand Samson Steel. But unfortunately for Walt, his suggestions are completely ignored by his greedy father and his naive brother. Like I said before, I find this story to be much more eventful. But let's come back to the present for a moment. Then we arrive at a confusing character trait of Utopia. For some reason, he is religious. During my first watching, I was ready to tear his devotion apart by showing everyone why he has no reason to believe in God. But at the end of the series, I got a satisfactory answer for this question. Because the superpowers Sheldon and his super friends have were gifted to them by a Lovecraftian entity. So it is understandable why Sheldon is a God-fearing conservative. But let's move on. I promise I will get to that again very soon. Even though there is a lot of unnecessary exposition in the next scene. It is quite the well-performed scene. Right when Utopian and his family are about to eat, they are interrupted by Chloe, who is Sheldon's daughter. This awkward scene confirms that Sheldon is out of touch with his children, while establishing Chloe as a hedonistic rebel. After the dinner is cut short, when Chloe storms out of the house, Brandon goes to meet his friend Barry Bishop. So apparently Barry Bishop is Brandon's best friend, whom he didn't meet in quite a while. Even though he appears only in the first episode, he plays a huge role in changing Brandon's mind on many things. And with that, the show takes us back to see how Brandon and Walt were doing the day the US economy collapsed. The scene starts with Sheldon talking with his best friend George. But after hearing about a collapse, Sheldon runs into the Samson Steel building and talks with Walt. Walt aggressively tells Sheldon how, if they had listened to his advice, they wouldn't be in such a dire situation. After hearing that, Sheldon runs to look for his father and finds him at the top of the building. Sheldon tries to comfort him and take him downstairs, but his father refuses to go with him and says, "I'll be right down," and then jumps off the building. Honestly, this scene was hilarious, but it haunts Sheldon to this very day. Classic Samson. Then it cuts to Sheldon and Walt in the Hall of Justice having a conversation. During this conversation, the name Skyfox comes up, and it is revealed that Skyfox was a former superhero who turned evil, and the secret identity of Skyfox was George. But to me, the most interesting part of this conversation is Sheldon proclaiming that the code is what separates the heroes from the villains. Now you might wonder, what is the code? It's the moral standard Utopian and all the other heroes are supposed to follow. This includes two commandments. We don't kill, we don't govern. And Sheldon genuinely believes that if the superheroes break these rules, it would be the end of free will for all humanity. And this is when Walt subtly says,
It'd be the end of free will. Well, some would say free will is what's bringing the world to its knees.
this is the first bit of evidence we get for Walt being a nefarious villain, and it becomes clearer and clearer as the time goes on. Then we get to see two superheroes looking at a battle from afar, and this is the moment where it is revealed that the infamous supervillain Black Star has escaped containment, and the greatest heroes of Earth are battling this fearsome foe. Even though this battle was a goofy CGI fest on par with the CW shows, it has a very interesting moment. After killing two heroes including Barry Bishop, Black Star attempts to kill Utopian. This infuriates Brandon and he annihilates Black Star's face and kills him where he stood. This infuriates Utopian and he starts screaming at his son. He says that he took the easy way out. This drives Brandon into a rage and he asks Sheldon,
You took the easy way out. Did that look easy to you?
and leaves. But to their surprise, it is revealed that Black Star never escaped, and the foe they battled was in fact a clone. The episode ends with the real Black Star being brought to the lab to examine the clone of Black Star. So the next episode starts with Black Star observing his clone's body, and we get to find out that Black Star is a lot stronger than his clone. But this raises a few questions. Black Star is brought to the lab restricted only by handcuffs? A supervillain that strong could easily break out of handcuffs, couldn't he? Now I know what you are thinking. Black Star wears an armor that amplifies his strength, so without it he isn't that strong. But later in episode 8 we find out that Black Star is strong enough to beat down Paragon and Utopian at the same time. So Black Star's strength is quite inconsistent. But let's move past this, since Black Star is only a prop in the true villain's plan. Meanwhile, Black Star gets dragged away.
Rules don't apply when it's your kid doing the killing, not
Out of here.
Oh, double standards don't look good on you, pal!
Now I'm certain you might think that killing a supervillain to save the lives of everyone isn't bad. But Utopian takes it very seriously. As an example, when he hears people congratulating Brandon for killing Black Star, Sheldon gets super offended. Then we get an interesting scene where a hero notices that fake Black Star didn't speak at all. Then we move to the press conference where Lady Liberty is answering questions. Suddenly a journalist jumps at her and asks, 78% of people from a poll they conducted supports Paragon's decision to end Black Star's life. This further irritates Utopian. Then we get an interesting little conversation between Sheldon and his son in their farm. Brandon asks him what he was supposed to do in that scenario because his father was in danger and he acted fast because he would always choose to save his father despite the cost. Then he turns to Sheldon and asks, wouldn't you do the same?
I chose you, Dad. And I choose you every time. Wouldn't you do the same?
In this scene, it is honestly interesting how Sheldon avoids entertaining this hypothetical by misleading the conversation and advising Brandon by saying, the code, it has to stand, Brandon. And then we move back to the past where Sheldon is mourning his father's death. He is faced with a horrible article accusing Sheldon's father of tapping into the workers' pension funds to expand his wealth. Sheldon is sent into a rage and runs to find the writer of this article. This is where he meets Chase Kennedy, his future wife and co-superhero. Then we return to the present where Sheldon goes to visit his daughter, Chloe, to ask her to talk to Brandon and help him realize that killing is not the way. And this is the first scene I started to realize that there is a strange trope in this show where someone makes a joke and everyone else doesn't get it. It doesn't really bother me, but it felt weird and made the interactions between the characters more awkward than they should be. Then we go to Barry Bishop's funeral. Here Brandon gives a heartfelt speech, and this reminds Sheldon of the speech he tried to give at his father's funeral after he realized that his father is an awful person. In this flashback, Sheldon faints and goes into a coma. But I do like how the policeman tries to help the widow of Barry and talks with Brandon. It's really nice. The third episode starts with Sky Fox's son being introduced. Apparently he is a criminal, but for some reason he does follow the code. Or at least he claims to, because later on he kills 2 people. But we can get to that later. So Sky Fox's son, who I will be calling Hutchins, and his group of super criminals are planning to steal a suitcase with lights for their boss, the big man. And apparently Hutchins has a mystical device that can teleport him to wherever he wants. I'm not even going to try to talk about this MacGuffin because it has the potential to break the story. But let's just go with its magic from the Eldritch God. So Hutchins attempts to steal the suitcase with lights all alone and ends up getting the suitcase destroyed. Then we get a flashback to George's morning routine. However, his weird breakfast with 99 eggs is interrupted by Walt and Sheldon's girlfriend at the time. They tell George that there is something wrong with Sheldon. Then we return to the present, where Hutchins is discussing his failure with his comrades, and suddenly he gets a call from a German who wants to make a deal. The German asks for money, but this phone call was interrupted by 2 thugs who asks him for the suitcase with lights. So Hutchins goes to the big man to plead his case. The big man forgives him and gives him another task. Then we go back to the past, where George visits an insane Sheldon who is talking with the hallucination of his dead father while drawing nonsense. George gives him some solid advice and comforts him, but before leaving a much calmer Sheldon behind, George collects some of Sheldon's drawings and takes them with him. Then we return to the present where Hutchins and his crew have successfully retrieved another briefcase and are being chased by 2 thugs with superpowers. But the thugs fail to catch up to them, and then they escape the thugs. But unfortunately for them, they accidentally hit Chloe. Chloe beats everyone except Hutchins, who abandons his friends after dropping the briefcase. Then we return to George's story, where he tries to understand Sheldon's drawings, so he goes back to Sheldon to talk to him about them. But to George's surprise, Sheldon is better, and then George casually brings up the drawings, and this suddenly changes Sheldon's behavior and makes him see his dead father and surreal visions once again. Then we see a bruised Hutchins sulking in a bar, and the 2 thugs approach him once again. The thugs ask for the briefcase. He says he doesn't have it, and one of the thugs grabs the MacGuffin, but to the thugs' surprise, Hutchins teleports the thug into shark-infested waters and sends the MacGuffin into Big Man's heart, killing the Big Man. So the other thug runs away after Hutchins meets the German and gets some sort of an energy source that can power a city, and then it is revealed that Hutchins is attempting to build a machine to find his father, Skyfox. The next episode is all about Chloe's miserable life, and it's not a bad episode, but it's a bit boring compared to the others. So apparently after Chloe ended up beating up Hutchins' crew, she took the briefcase with her, The briefcase was full of drugs. She overdoses, and Hutchins appears soon after and takes her to the hospital because he was her childhood friend who was playing with Brendan and her in the first episode. But meanwhile, in the past, we get to see Sheldon, who ran away from home looking for the things he saw in his visions. These visions lead him to a house in the middle of nowhere, and in this house was a man who was expecting his arrival, who kills himself because he can't handle the voices of the beyond. But Sheldon manages to get a lot of information from this madman before he kills himself. So he heads back home with a bunch of coordinates, that is the location of the next episode starts in the past. Sheldon, plagued by visions of madness, digs up his father's body and retrieves his father's pocket watch to try to make sense of things. Then we move back to the future, where Chase and Sheldon are talking. This is where Chase finds out that Brandon is sent to Black Star's autopsy to make sure he knows that what he did was wrong. This angers Chase, so she tells him to remember that he is a human and he shouldn't be pushed this hard to be a perfect hero. Then we return to the Hall of Justice, where Brandon is wondering how he could have changed things. Then Walt comes and tries to help him get over his guilt. But Brandon is still drowning in self-doubt and depression. This is when Barnabas arrives. Barnabas is an eccentric superhero that can bend inorganic matter to his will. He was summoned to disassemble Black Star clone's armor, and I feel like Barnabas is written to be unlikable, but I thought he was funny and a bit charming. And then everyone gathers around and Barnabas removes the armor. Afterwards, Fritz, who is a crippled superhero, does an autopsy on the clone in front of them and discovers a strange metal contraption within the clone. Apparently this is some sort of a puzzle. Although it looks more magical to me, it's apparently the kind of technology Skyfox uses. And then Barnabas opens the puzzle and discovers Sheldon's dad's pocket watch. Then we move back to the past once more, where a troubled Sheldon goes to meet George. Sheldon then tells him about the visions and convinces him to gather the team he sees in his visions and set off to the location of the coordinates. Then we return to the present, where Sheldon is having a therapy session with a criminal mastermind. They talk about morality and philosophical dilemmas, and apparently Sheldon feels comfortable around him. I'm not sure why that is, but I get the feeling he will return in the second season as a villain. In this conversation we discover that Utopian is desperately trying to make sense of the world.
I'm suggesting that you exist in a world of your own creation, a world of black and white.
But his naive perspective won't allow him to see the big picture.
And how the majority of people live in it. In shades of grey.
Then Sheldon and Walt meet at Sheldon's house and they compare the original pocket watch from his father and the one from the puzzle. Apparently they are identical, and Walt comes to the conclusion that this is Skyfox's doing, and Sheldon agrees, although the culprit is right in front of his face. Then Sheldon flies to Skyfox's son. I'm not sure how he finds him, but Hutchins teleports away, startled. Then Sheldon gets to his location in barely no time at all, and again I'm not sure how he found out Hutchins' location, but he did. And instead of teleporting again, Hutchins starts running. Sheldon lasers the ground, he falls down and drops the MacGuffin. Then Sheldon picks it up and Hutchins tries to teleport him away, but it stops? I'm seriously confused. But all we can do is attribute this to the Great Old Ones manipulating fate, and I'm going to be honest, using the Great Old Ones to fill plot holes can get tiresome. Ignoring what just happened, Hutchins reveals to Sheldon that he can't use the MacGuffin to find his father. Then Sheldon leaves disappointed. Meanwhile, in a flashback, Sheldon and George goes and recruits Chase Kennedy to set out on the adventure. Will they succeed? Then they go and recruit an unwilling Fritz with promises of money. But the next member of the crew is Walt, and Sheldon and Walt end up arguing and parting ways. But thanks to George, Walt decides to join them in their insane endeavor. Meanwhile, in the present, Fritz and Walt plans to revive the clone star temporarily so Walt can go into his brain and get info on everything. And Hutchins and Chloe are having an affair. I'm not sure how or why it started, and I really don't want to use the Eldritch excuse, but that feels like the only explanation. Don't get me wrong, I like the series, but man, it sure does have a lot of contrivances. And then we arrive at the 6th episode titled What's the Use? And it's definitely my favorite episode for so many reasons. First off, they reference H.P. Lovecraft.
The great old ones. You ever read Lovecraft?
In the past, they go on a journey on a ship where they are helpless and some incomprehensible force threatens their lives. The whole episode feels like a cosmic horror story, and it's beyond brilliant. But in the end, our team of adventurers reach their destination, an island that should not exist. And in the present, Lady Liberty meets an aspiring young hero who believes in the code and inspires others to do better. She is proud of this hero who gives mercy to the merciless, but during a superhuman villain attack, she is killed in a gruesome manner. This makes Lady Liberty almost break their code and killing the villain. Then we find out that the Samson family is growing forever further from each other, except for Walt, who is being held up as the moral center of the family. So the plan to get into Black Star's head has begun. But there is a risk. If Black Star's mind collapses into mush while Walt is in there, he will die. But Walt doesn't even have to go inside because he was the one who created the clone. He was the one who made them fight. This was a risky yet brilliant plan, but there are always elements you don't necessarily account for. Lady Liberty suggests to talk to Walt's daughter Raikou. And now Walt is in quite the dangerous situation. So he talks to Raikou and promises to pay her if she helps out. But the truth is, Walt doesn't want Raikou involved in this, because if she finds out, everyone would know that he was the mastermind. So it made no sense for him to actually talk to her and bring her. Instead, he could have said, I can't contact her because Raikou is in Japan. Thus Walt took an unnecessary risk there. And by the way, why is Raikou killing people with a sword? Why not do it the way Walt tries to kill Black Star? Although Raikou is a lovely lady, removing her would have made a lot more sense. But you might have to wait to hear the rest of the issues I have with the series. Don't worry, I'll get to them soon. Amidst this madness, we get a flashback to the fellas going to the island. They are subjected to different tests. In the other island is a lot larger than they assumed. Everything about the island is done well. But there is something else that really bugged me. So this entire episode is about Walt waiting for Raikou to come and help them. And meanwhile, Walt goes to the Supermax and talks to Black Star and threatens to kill him. And this is where we get to see how powerful Walt really is. He makes the real Black Star forget how to breathe, and Black Star almost dies.
I've just made your brain forget how to breathe.
But before leaving Black Star behind, Walter makes sure to leave a piece of technology that allows Black Star to get out, and there's this whole weird subplot going on with Chloe and Hutchins, but I didn't really care for it. So let's get to the interesting part. In the island, Sheldon and his crew are tested by a being beyond their comprehension, and they work together and pass all the tests. Suddenly, they end up in a moon of Jupiter. Now that should answer the question, why was this named Jupiter's Legacy? But that's not the part I have problem with. The part I have problem with is, why does this being have to test these people? And why is this test so convoluted? Just look at the test. In order to enter the test, 5 people need to follow a lunatic who hallucinates a dead loved one. So in order to stand a chance at getting powers, we need to be either desperate, stupid or insane. So Jupiter, your legacy isn't going to be taken forward by healthy minded people. And the god alien monster tells them that they have been chosen. Okay? Chosen for what? Chosen to receive powers? Then why do so many people around the world get powers? Because they didn't go through the tests. Maybe they were chosen to be the champions of justice. If that's the case, why does this entity care about justice in a small planet? This makes no sense. It makes no sense. Unless they were chosen to follow Jupiter. The crew weren't the only ones chosen. It was the entire human race, and the being has deemed them worthy of being devoured. Now, if the space god were going to eat Earth, why would it give our team superpowers? Personally, I think the powers this thing give are more like seasoning. A bit of spice to an otherwise boring meal. Now, I'm not sure what happens in the comic. And this is only my theory, so take it with a grain of salt. But here's the thing. If I wanted to talk about this subject, I could go on and on without an end. But let's move on. While Walt is in Black Star's brain, the original Black Star escapes the prison. Then Brandon and Sheldon go to stop him. But something shocking happens. Black Star beats the shit out of Brandon and threatens to kill him unless Utopian kills him. In front of such an easy choice, Sheldon freezes up and is left speechless. But he isn't the only one who is left speechless. Brandon is hit with the realization that his father would rather let him die than kill another person. This honestly gave me goosebumps. Now I know. Some might say Sheldon's stupid for not killing Black Star, but everything he does reflects upon the Utopian. And everyone, including the Eldritch Sentients, is watching. What would he choose? It's a very tense moment until another hero busts in and they defeat Black Star together, but Brandon will always remember that. Then we go back to Walt and Raikou. Apparently Walt is trapped. Lady Liberty goes in and Walt shows her Skyfox and escapes after a small battle. Now since it is confirmed that George is the villain, Walt's plan is almost complete.
The hell did you see in there?
Skyfox.
But there is still a chance that Raikou would ruin it. So Walt kills Raikou and pretends to go on his merry way. Now honestly, there is a lot to unpack here. But to be fair, it does try something original. And I like the elements from cosmic horror. On the other hand, we got major contrivances and strange MacGuffins. And let's not even talk about the message. You will be rewarded to going to wherever your madness takes you. But to be fair, the characters were well written, although the effects were quite lacking in quality. It still has room to improve. So I'll give it a 6 out of 10.